This episode of the Good Food CFO Podcast is sponsored by Settle. You're listening to the Good Food CFO Podcast. I am your host, Sarah Delavan, and with us, as always, is our producer, Chelsea Steer. Chelsea, what do you have for us today?
Hey, Sarah, and hello, listeners. Sarah, before I answer that question, I want to remind everyone listening that we have a really big goal here on the podcast, and that is to reach 1 million food founders.
Yep.
And one of the ways that you listening at home or in the car, maybe you're working out, wherever you're listening, right? One of the ways that you can help us to reach that goal is by sharing this episode or any episode that you listen to, rating the podcast wherever you're listening, whether it's Spotify, Apple, right? Even on YouTube, leave us a comment, like the video, and leave us a review. We love sharing those reviews here. And I actually have a new one for you today, Sarah.
I love it.
Yeah. So this review comes from Melanie from the Lazy Goat Studio. And she said, just rewatching you folks on the 100th episode on YouTube for the first time. I cannot describe how much your podcasts have been instrumental in pricing our products and gaining confidence with our choices.
My gosh. Well, first of all, Melanie, thank you so much for sharing this with us. As I think I've said here before, we do this work for you guys and for positive change in our food industry. And it is just so wonderful to hear from folks to know that they're listening and that you're benefiting from the content that we are creating. And so just thank you. And same goes for reviews. You don't have to email us or, you can post a review. I think I know that this one came into our inbox because I happen to have seen it there. It just makes me so happy and humbled and dedicated to keep creating content that matters and that can really help founders and change our industry. And I know, Chelsea, you and I are equally committed to that. So just everything you said, reaching 1 million good food founders is such a gigantic goal, but it is our goal. And we're going to do it one listener and one subscriber at a time. And folks like Melanie, you're truly helping us to reach that one additional founder, whether it be every day or every week. So I could go on, but just seriously and sincerely, thank you so, so much. And thank you, Chelsea, for bringing that review and feedback to the podcast, because it's always nice to hear it here as well.
Of course. And I would just reiterate everything you just said, right? Copy paste. Melanie, thank you so much. We did love receiving that in our inbox. I remember tagging each other and being heart faces and hearts, and it was
that
really
thing
lovely.
They say on social media of when you purchase something from a small business owner, when you send a piece of feedback to a small business owner, and we're quite a small business. We shared a little bit about that in our impact report recently. We really do celebrate. There is a text chain. There is an email thread. It really does excite us. It's not just about, showcasing it here on the podcast. It is meaningful to everybody on our team. So on behalf of our VP of operations, Keisha, who doesn't get to show up here on the podcast, she celebrates every review, every feedback, every purchase just as much as we do. So thank you from Keisha as well.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we've talked through that, Sarah, I want to talk about our main episode today. We're getting to hear from your conversation with Hope Lawrence.
Oh, awesome. I loved that conversation.
Yeah, this is one that we recorded a while ago, and now it gets to have its day in the sun.
Yeah. So Hope is the founder of Hudson Henry Baking Company, which is a granola business that she started in 2012. She named it after her two sons, Hudson and Henry. And it's an award-winning granola. They've got 6 Sophie Awards, which are the Oscars of the packaged, food industry. She was featured on the Today Show as one of Kathy Lee and Hoda's favorite things. She shares a really fun story about that and how that all went down on the podcast. And the reason we invited her to the podcast is because we wanted to know her story and wanted her to share her story of starting her business with very little investment. It was a self-funded business. She focused on, operations and efficiency from the very beginning. She believes that starting small and fully owning, your region, your hometown is critical before ever thinking about going, national. And she sold her business to, I'm just going to say, a like-minded company. And one of the reasons so many reasons I wanted to have her on the podcast, some of which I just listed, but a big one was this idea that like selling out, quote unquote, selling your business is either like good or bad, or, you shouldn't do it, et cetera. There's a lot of dialogue around that, especially on social media these days, especially following the sale of Siete and Simple Mills, right? Hope illustrates for us a way to sell your business to a values aligned organization, right? And what does that mean? And what does that look like? And what is the benefit of doing that? And I'm not going to overshare here because I want people to listen, and I want you to hear it from Hope herself. But it's just really a wonderful story, and one that aligns with that BABOYOT energy and doing things on your own terms, not the way that big media tells us we, quote unquote, should build our business, right? Big and fast, and with tons of investment. So I'm just super excited for everybody to hear Hope's story.
Yeah. And I will say one of the things I took away right from the beginning of the episode, right, was how little she did actually invest in the business initially and how quickly they got to profitability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big part of that, as you already said, right, was that focus on efficiency, on operations. And I think there are some other things that she shares, right? Like the kitchen. You'll hear all about the kitchen that they worked in. She had that going for her. But I do think that focus on operations, including why she chose granola in the first place. I love that she shared that. That was a big thing for me right in the beginning of the episode, and I can't wait for people to hear it.
Yeah. What I love also about this episode is that we get to hear from a founder who sort of did it, if you will, right? A lot of times on the podcast, we've got super early stage. We've even had pre-launch founders on the show. We've got founders who are in it, right? In the thick of growing their business on their own terms. And this is a point of view from someone who built a business and sold it and is moving on in her career. And I think that's also a really important aspect, of business and life to talk about and to share here. So I'm excited. I think we've shared enough, Chelsea.
Yeah.
What do you think? Should we get to the main episode?
I love it. Let's get into it.
Good food founders, let's talk about cash flow, the metric that truly determines your ability to grow your business. We all know that figuring out your true costs, your margins, and projecting cash flow isn't always as straightforward as it could be. When your data is scattered across systems, it is easy to lose track and leave money on the table. That's where Settle comes in. Settle is the only platform built for CPG brands that combines inventory, payments, and procurement into one unified system. And they offer integrated financing for your invoices to help extend your cash runway. Settle helps you make smarter decisions and keeps your business on track to grow sustainably. Head over to settle.com/goodfood to learn how brands like Carnivore Snacks use Settle to manage their cash flow and growth. Hope, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that we finally had a chance to do this.
I know. I remember learning about you in the vein of like operations. Like, oh, Hope is someone who is like really great at operations and had a brand called Hudson Henry and is just like someone you need to meet. I feel like that's sort of the conversation that was had with me, you know what I mean? And then like prior to us connecting. So I was like, we must have a conversation on the podcast because love and operations expert, can't talk about that enough, right? And it's that impact, that it has on the business financially and otherwise, but also because I learned through getting to know you that you didn't take any outside funding for your business.
Correct.
And that you ended up, selling your business. And I think there are so many unique aspects to your story and your experience that I'm just dying for people to hear about it.
Perfect.
So can we start at the beginning? And I want to ask, like, what inspired you to start a food business? Where did that come from?
Sure. So I grew up in the country, and so, child of the 70s or whatever. And we always say, like, we used to say, like, is there any candy, cake, pie, ice cream, cookies in the house? Right. And I would be the one, like, little 8-year-old Hope, making the pie, candy, cake, pie, ice cream, cookies. And so I was always a baker, but that wasn't my career at all. So went to college, graduated. I was a stockbroker. I worked finally got up to, I was a product manager for Standard and Poor's and Fitch Ratings, got pregnant. And I was like, that's it. I'm getting out of the rat race and I never want to work in a cubicle again. So I'm like, what am I going to do? And so my husband's Australian. We were in Texas at the time, and we're like, let's move back to Virginia because I grew up in Virginia. Let's move back to Virginia, and we're going to do something. Like, wasn't sure what. And I actually looked at some farmers markets. And I was like, okay, I'm going to bake something. And we found this old farmhouse with a commercial kitchen in the basement. It was an old bed and breakfast.
Wow.
And I'm like, great. We found this house. It was near Charlottesville. And we're like, great, we're going to move there and we're going to make granola. And it was a business from day one.
Yeah. I read somewhere that you chose granola because it was sort of easy in a sense to like produce and easy to ship and easy to store. And so you were thinking about the business on that level of like, what can I kind of combine my love of baking and business? Like, how can I do it? But also like what makes sense and like won't be that difficult.
Correct. Because I had no idea what I was doing, right? So I didn't want to do something like cookies that would go stale or even granola bars that would crumble, or, you had to have a whole granola bar in the package or what have you.
Yeah.
I actually was going to, like, when we were still in Texas and I was thinking about what am I going to do, I started reading like blogs and magazines or what have you. And it was all the inspirational messages, right? Follow your passion, reading all the books. And at first I was going to do like inspirational posters. They were going to be like the Subway style inspirational posters that was my first business idea. But then I thought, like, wouldn't it be great if you started your day reading this sort of inspirational messaging instead of like the morning news? Like, we used to grow up like reading like the cereal box, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that led to, the product initially, it was called Good News Granola. And it was, because it was the two things. It was like my eureka moment. I'm like, okay, I'll make granola and I'll put inspirational messages on the back label.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. So it was called Good News Granola. And that's how I got onto today's show, because it said like, my dream is to have this granola company, buy a Jeep with old Jeep with wooden panels,
Yes.
and land a spot on the Today Show, right? And then I got on the Today Show. But yeah, it was definitely what is easy to produce and something with a long shelf life, something easy to ship. So yeah, I just went with granola.
Okay. So you started in 2012, from what I understand, selling at
Correct.
the city market in Virginia under the brand Good News Granola, I'm assuming.
Correct.
You get onto the Today Show. And from what I understand, at some point around there, you were on the shelves of Whole Foods in the Mid-Atlantic region. Can you help me understand the timeline there? And were you still Good News Granola, or did you switch to Hudson Henry?
Correct. So we were Good News Granola for probably the first 2 years. And so now, whenever I talk to entrepreneurs, I'm like, make sure you check your trademark, because I did the trademark search as Good News Granola, the whole phrase, and nothing came up, of course. But there was a Good News candy bar. So I was Good News Granola for probably the first 2 years, and then finally did the trademark search. And the attorney was like, you can't be Good News Granola. There was a Good News candy bar from like the 1950s.
Okay.
And so by then, but it was always Hudson Henry Baking Company as the company name.
Okay.
Good News Granola as the brand name.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so we did the switch around year 2. But we started selling at the Charlottesville City Market in October 2012. Month 6, Whole Foods, just the Charlottesville store. And then month 10, the Today Show.
Wow. And the Today Show, did you have like a PR person? Were you actively trying to get onto the Today Show? Did they just find you? How does that happen?
It was a great story and it's a great service. It still is out there. So there's a company called Tin Shingle, TIN, and then the word shingle.
Yeah.
And it's a DIY PR company, right? Because I couldn't afford PR.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. So it's one of those services that have the different publishers or editors of all the different magazines, right? So you're
Yeah.
basically paying for those contacts. But how they did it is they still have it. It's a wonderful service called the Pitch Whisperer service.
Oh.
And they would read my pitch and edit it for me. And they wouldn't give you the Today Show contact straight away. Basically, you have to prove, or at the time, like prove yourself to us that you have a good product and your pitches are great and things along those lines. So I worked with them for a couple of months. We got into a couple of different magazines. And then I'm like, great, I want to pitch the Today Show. And that was in July. And so that would have been July of 2013, I guess. And I was completely confident that I would get a spot, right?
Yeah.
So we were going to the beach. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't go to the beach. Like, we're going to get on Today's Show like next week or whatever. And so I sent the granola to the producer of Kathy Lee and Hoda for their favorite things. And it was just an email pitch. And she received the pitch and she's like, great, send the granola. So I FedExed the granola overnight. Like 2 days later, she emailed, great granola, love it. Like, my kids love it. Said nothing about wanting to be on the show. So then you start the follow-up, right? So then it's like, I emailed a week later. It was like, can I send you more granola? Like, what, any information you need or whatever.
Yeah.
Nothing. Love the granola. It's great. So that went on. I probably emailed her 3 or 4 times and nothing was ever said. Nothing was said. And then September, I think it was September 10th, at the time, at the old farmhouse that we bought, we had a bed and breakfast. We had little cabins on the property. Someone had stayed in our cabins. She called to say that she had left her boots in our cabin. And she was talking to my husband. I was already up, down in the basement making granola. And she's like, I left my boots in your cabin. And I think your granola is on Kathy Lee and Hoda's desk.
Oh.
And we're like, oh my gosh. And I thought I had missed the segment. I guess it shows differently in different areas or whatever. And like my friends from New York started calling because it had already aired in New York. And then it aired in Virginia. Like, I think it aired at like 10 o'clock in the morning or something in Virginia. And so we had no idea that it was going to happen.
Wow.
And our online sales, because again, it was only 10 months in business, our online sales quadrupled.
Wow.
And we had customers who purchased from seeing it on the Today Show that purchased for like the next 10 years.
Wow.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it was fantastic.
Was it like a oh no moment when you saw the orders rolling in, or were you prepared and you were like, we got this? Like,
we were okay. And again, I mean, we were still small scale. So even so I say quadruple, like I can't remember. I think the order count was maybe like 120 orders, right? Like it wasn't 1,000. And the segment is still out there. You can find it on YouTube. Maybe she said the name of the company. She read the back of the label. She's about, wanting to get on the Today Show. It was Kathy Lee. It's super funny because she says, this guy sent me this granola. And then off stage, they're yelling like, woman. And then the teleprompter's not working. She's like, doing the teleprompter. And then she says, this guy again. And then someone off stage yells, Hope Lawrence. And then she's like, yeah. I mean, it was like, you get what you get, right?
Yeah.
But it was pretty amazing.
That's amazing. That's awesome. So PR platform helps you get to your dream of being on the Today Show. You're selling in Whole Foods stores. Are you, and it sounds like you're selling direct into Whole Foods. You're not dealing with distribution when you're in that like local foraging kind of thing.
Right.
At what point, this is something else I read, is that at some point you were limited by the amount of granola that you could actually create because you were doing it alone for a while, it sounded like.
Absolutely. So even when I had staff, so I think I hired my first employee. I mean, I didn't even get like a proper oven until probably like month 6 as well. Like I had like
Okay.
literally a single oven like that you would have at home, right?
Yeah.
And then a bakery in our town went out of business, and I bought a double stack like from the 1970s. Even when we had employees like 10 years later, we used to joke like, this is the week we're going to catch up. Like we are going to get ahead this week.
Yeah.
The first couple of years, and we took on staff pretty quickly. So we went
Okay.
from like 1 employee to 2 or 3 employees. And then by the time we sold the business, just to jump ahead, we had like maybe 12 part-time employees
Okay.
baking 4 days a week, 6 a.m. to like 1 p.m.
Yeah.
But we rarely had back stock, right? So we sold everything we made in a given week. Sometimes, I mean, we had a bit of back stock towards the end, obviously, but we would just at the beginning, like we would end on a Friday, and there was still a list of orders that we didn't
Right.
fill, right? So we would try to fill an order, like within a week or so.
Right.
So yeah, I couldn't make enough. We couldn't make enough granola.
Yeah. May I ask how much of an investment you personally made into the business to get it up and running? Obviously, you have a home that's got a bit of a setup in it that you could
Right.
utilize, in the beginning,
Right.
but packaging and, all of the things that you need up front. Can you give us a sense of what that looked like?
Sure. So, and this is the part when people are like, no, that can't be true. But so I think I put in $4,000.
Yeah.
And granted, but I had a commercial kitchen in the basement, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I had a triple sink. I had as I said, it was just a regular oven with
Yeah.
a cooktop, and I had a fridge, I had a freezer. So we were, as I said, like we were pretty lean. So I paid
Yeah.
for logo and label design, but not much. And then kind of did everything myself,
Yeah.
right? It was a lot of like live and learn and figure
Yeah.
things out and ask people questions or what have you. And then so we were, for the first year, I can honestly say like I did not take a penny out of the business.
Okay.
Everything went back into the business, right? We used to say like, if it costs money, we're not doing it, right? Like as a family, we were like all in, and it was a tough slog the first year.
Yeah.
And then, so I guess I probably started taking a draw in the second year, and then the company paid back that 4,000 investment. But we never took on debt. We never took an investment. We were profitable from like the 6-month mark.
Yeah.
So within the first 6 months, like we had paid back ourselves that 4,000, and then we
Yeah.
were profitable.
That's amazing. I think it's really inspirational. And even though, your part of your story is that, our home had this commercial kitchen in it, we had one other set of founders, their sisters on the show a while ago now. And they talked about like their scrappiness of, we needed new equipment, but we didn't go buy new equipment. We bought used equipment. We hunted on
Oh,
Craigslist.
absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Right.
We really tried to
Yeah.
keep our costs down for the same reasons. It's like,
Right.
they understood what they could afford, and they didn't
Right.
want to, take on debt or anything. And they did it, and they're doing it, which is so cool.
Right.
So you're selling at Whole Foods, you're selling on Shopify. What does the balance look like in terms of like how much are you selling in that wholesale sales channel versus direct to consumer?
Sure. So towards the end, and I would guess it was probably more wholesale at the beginning, right? Even though like getting on the Today Show definitely helped online sales, but at the end it was 75% wholesale, 25% Shopify, and then 5% Amazon, right? So maybe it was 30% between online and Amazon. We didn't do much with Amazon. And just going back to your point about, profitability, this, I don't know. I think, and this is something that I think the industry is struggling with. I mean, I couldn't imagine not being profitable, right? Like this
Mm,
is how, this was our family's like only source of money. Like my
right.
husband and I, like we didn't have other jobs. So this was it. And so I know there's another path, right? Like you can take on investment, you can take on
Sure.
debt, and you're not really profitable, but your company is growing much more quickly, perhaps. That was never our thing. So, I
Yeah.
mean, you would almost call it like a lifestyle business. And absolutely on buying like all of our equipment was used, right? I
Yeah.
think it was only when we moved. So we were in the basement for 4 years. And then we moved to what I call like a proper commercial space. So we moved 10 miles to the Food Lion shopping center near us and got 2,500 square feet in like a strip mall beside a hairdresser type thing.
Nice.
And then we bought new ovens. That was the only new stuff we bought.
What's going through my mind right now is, and as you said, so maybe in the earlier days, there might have been a little bit more D2C, and then it transitioned to the percentages that you mentioned in terms of wholesale really being the
Right.
majority of where the product went. But I'm thinking about, okay, $4,000 invested in the business, that's paid back. The business is profitable, and you're selling over time more and more wholesale. And what typically happens is the margins on wholesale are so small,
Right.
even sometimes direct to wholesale, that founders aren't able to sustain, right? So in my
Right.
mind, I'm thinking to myself, you had to have margins that were good even at that wholesale level, that they had to be high
Right.
enough to help you maintain a positive cash flow to continue to pay yourself, to invest in the business,
Right.
to be able to purchase ovens. And going back to what I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, I can only imagine that operations and how you managed your operations was key in
Right.
doing this successfully.
Right. Right. All those things. So we were pretty lean operationally, like very efficient.
Mm-hmm.
I only had 5 flavors, and those 5 flavors of granola were made with maybe like 14 ingredients.
Okay.
So there was a lot of overlap. So there was pecans, everything had like kind of the same base, and then the nut changed. So there was pecan,
Okay.
walnut, cashew, pistachio, and then pecan and chocolate, which was literally the pecan and add some chocolate chips in. So lean there. And then the margins, like I started with, in my mind, and I don't know if this is still correct. So in my mind, you're supposed to have 60% gross margin, right?
I'd love that.
Which I
Yes.
think which I was pretty close to. And I wasn't, I was probably, I don't know, like 50% margin. So we were $7.99 was our suggested retail. Most of the
Mm-hmm.
stores did like $8.99. So
Okay.
$7.99 or $8.99. The wholesale price was $5.50,
Okay.
and the store paid shipping. Granola in a bag with rent and employees, like $2.50 to $2.75 a bag, maybe.
So interestingly, so you would be at 250 selling at 550, right? You're on the
Right,
right, you're higher than 50%. And if you're including rent in that, which oftentimes I
right,
don't, I kind of consider that an operating expense, you would have been above 50%
right.
margin
Okay,
on that. So,
right,
and that's with the blend of wholesale and direct to consumer, which like that's something that I'll say we preach to the listeners here,
right,
is that,
right,
having a gross margin, what we call a blended gross margin, so across all channels for the business as a
right,
whole, of greater than 50% reduces your reliance on debt. It reduces your need to take on debt in the business, and
right,
actually enables you to create a business where you have positive cash flow. And I was really hoping that you would say, provide that level of detail for people,
right,
because especially in today's environment, now that we've seen that like heavy investment in CPG, from folks who were previously in the tech world or what have you, that has gone away.
right,
It's
right,
expensive to borrow money, right? And so now more than ever, we need to be focusing on the profit margins. We always should have been, right? But now it's like other people are sort of catching on too. And so to hear you say, like, we bootstrapped it in the beginning, we invested some money, but nothing. I mean, it's a lot of money for a lot of people, $4,000, right? But if you can scrape it together, you can do something. And then when we talk about building a business on your own terms, what we're talking about is saying also what you said. This is a family business. We need this to make
Right.
money. So what do the margins need to be? How do we need to structure this thing so that we can generate positive cash flow and make this thing work? Because as so many other people in your position, would say, like, we have no other choice, right?
Right.
Like, we have to.
Right. So now now that I've sold the business, and I coach clients through our small business development center.
Yeah.
And I call it pricing for profitability. Like, are your prices correct? Do you know your costs? Are you actually profitable?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's so tough with so many folks, right? Like, you either don't want to look at your numbers because you're afraid of what it's going to tell you, or you don't know how to do the numbers, or you just start off wrong, right? Like, when I set up my pricing, I basically looked at like other comparable products and like, okay, well, what are they selling for? But I had no idea what my, cost of goods was when I first started out. And then I also, a couple of things that you said. So we definitely built the business that was right for us. Like, David, my husband, and I used to say, like, oh, the business could be this big, and like stretch out our arms. But again, the kids were 2 and 5, right? And then we were older parents, and that the family life, the boys were so important, right? Like, we didn't want to grow huge and, bring on a lot of stress. I didn't use a distributor until probably year 7.
Okay.
We got on so we built up to, I think it was about 12 Whole Foods, right? So those were the days when you just went, and I don't know if you still do it this way, but we would go from store to store, right? So we started with Charlottesville, and then we got into Short Pump in Richmond, which is near us, Virginia Beach, DC, just going store to store.
Yeah.
And I talked to, and we were in bags and we were in bulk. And in Charlottesville, we were the number 1 selling product in the bulk and candy section.
Amazing.
And I talked to someone, I was like, oh, I want to get on the planogram. Like, that was my big dream. I want to get on the planogram. And so they said, well, this is what you do. Like, call, or, write this woman. She's the regional person. Like, she's that decision maker. And so we went after that for like a year or two. And then literally out of the blue, not that woman, she had left, someone else came in. He emailed one day and said, we want to bring you in for the whole mid-Atlantic. Pick your distributor. And so that was the first time. And literally we only used that distributor for Whole Foods.
Yeah.
We didn't do any. I mean, I think they did a few other stores that they just put us in, but it was 99% Whole Foods.
Wow.
And that was the only so we never paid paid slotting fees.
Yeah.
We never had a broker. We just did everything ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that the store to store and Whole Foods is not a thing really anymore in most areas. I think you can get into like a single store or like a couple of stores in an area, you know what I mean? But yeah, it definitely looks a bit different now. The other thing I want to touch on that you're saying though is like, so many people think you have to find the distributor, get a distributor, and then kind of grow from there. But I definitely still believe in the idea of going to the right customers, the right stores, and selling your product there and being so successful that then you grow and then the distributor comes, and I was just speaking to someone yesterday, in fact, who had a nationwide product that was sold nationwide. They had worked with a couple different distributors, and she sold her business, but using her words, she said it was a fire sale. They were cash flow negative for a long time. They could not figure out how to change that given where they were selling, how they were selling, how far they were distributing. And so they sold the business. And what she said in retrospect was, if I believe that if we had not grown wide and instead had grown
Right.
deep in our
Yep.
state, maybe into our neighboring state, eventually we would probably still be in business. And
Right. Right.
I don't think that that message can be said enough times or loud enough
Right.
for people. I don't think there's anything wrong with aspiring to be national, but the pace at which you do it or you feel like you need to do it, you know what I mean?
Right.
And the path, I think it really does need to be unique to your situation, and you have to be tuned
Right.
into the finances to know if it will work for you, you know?
Right.
And it
Right.
sounds like your
Right.
brand would have been considered a regional brand for all intents and purposes. Is
Absolutely.
that
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Yep. Definitely. So we were primarily on the East Coast. We had a bit in the Midwest with plum markets. There was like 7 plum markets.
Okay.
Someone used to order off the West Coast, and we would always cringe because, the shipping to
Yeah.
California or wherever it was, I was like, oh my gosh, like just buy a California granola. And I remember like 2 things that's really like stuck with me and helped me. Someone said there's nothing wrong with being a regional business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much what I was like, fine. I never aspired to be a national brand. Right.
Yeah.
And then the other one was like when you first start, and I tell people that I talk to now. So when you first start, think about a 200-mile radius around
Mm-hmm.
where you are and saturate those 200 miles. And I guess it depends on where you live. Like I was pretty lucky. So I had Charlottesville, Richmond, plenty of businesses between those two. Like I
Right.
could go up towards DC and really saturate those markets. And we pretty much did, right? We got into talking about like how Whole Foods has changed. Wegmans, we talked to Wegmans because Wegmans was coming to Virginia for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
really. And that was Charlottesville, Richmond, and I forget what the third was. And so it was kind of the same conversation. So they reached out and they said, you have to use a distributor. And I totally dragged my feet on responding to them. And finally, the guy was very nice. And he's like, kind of, why are you dragging your feet? And I was like, I don't want to use a distributor. And he's like, great, I'll bring you in to these 3 stores as direct store delivery, but you're only going to get those 3 stores rather than, other stores with us, Wegmans. But again, for us, that was plenty, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And similar to what you're saying, I always tell people, like, build your business, right? Like, be proud of what you're building and do it your way and what you want. Like, over the years, we thought about growing larger,
Mm-hmm.
and we tried to find a co-packer, and we thought about distribution, but I heard like so many horror stories about working with a distributor and I talked to brokers.
Yeah.
But for me, I guess I just didn't want that stress, right? I didn't want to go into debt. I didn't want to worry about those things. Like with a co-packer, I used to say like, I would be like opening up every package to like double check it for quality or whatever, right? I couldn't imagine.
Yeah.
But obviously you do. If I had found a great co-packer, like it would have been great. And I would have loved that. Like that was my decision point towards the end. It was either sell the business or find a co-packer because I could do customer support, which I loved. That was like, I think one of our differentiating factors. Like I loved the relationship that I had with my stores and, with I call it the people orders, right? So the Shopify orders, I knew my customers. We hand wrote from day one to day when we sold the business. And I think they still do it today. Like we hand wrote a thank you note to every people order that went out the door. So I wanted to do customer support, branding, marketing, sales. I could do that all day long and be completely happy. So that was the choice towards the end, either sell the business or find a co-packer and do that. And then ultimately I sold the business, wanting to do something else, right?
Yeah.
Like you get burned out. It's hard. It's a hard business. And I had turned 50 and I'm like, if I'm going to get another job or start a different career or do something else, I need to do that at 50 and not 58 or 60 or what have you. So, but that's jumping ahead in our story a little bit.
Yeah. I want to talk about the selling and sort of the process of that and who you ultimately ended up selling to, because I think that's really interesting. But I want to kind of take a moment to go back to operations, because I
Okay.
wonder, was there anything that you felt like you did uniquely or that you really focused on that you think is important to share to founders who are maybe struggling with operations or not sure really how to approach it? I think something that's true for most food founders is they've not done this before or they've not,
Right, right,
created a
right,
product at scale, at the scale that you have to service enough customers to generate $1 million in a year, which you
right,
successfully
right,
did. So what
right.
was your approach, I guess, to operations, or any advice that you have for founders?
Sure. Sure. It's funny. We actually used to laugh about it because we used to say, like, even like right at the end, we are still changing things and simplifying things, and we're like, oh my
Mm,
gosh, like, why didn't we think about this like 6 years ago? And I did have a team that, some of the team members were with me for like 6 or 7 years. Like once we got into the space near the Food Lion, definitely keeping things simple, like simplifying as much as you can,
mhm.
communicating with your team, all of that improved over the years. We used to keep track of like how we did our tracking. So for lot tracking, so we had these sheets of paper and we looked back on it, and then like we would have days that we had like two batches of cashew and then two batches of pecan and two batches of walnut all on the same day, which was just chaos, right? Because we're
Right.
having to clean between and
Yeah.
switch gears or whatever. And so towards the end, I mean, it took us a while. We said, okay, we've got to get down to making one flavor a day. Like that would
Right.
make everyone's life so much easier. And it was probably like a 2 week transition that was a little bit tough because we did run out of, I mean, not having a lot of back stock.
Right.
We're like, we just have to push through. Like, we got to just make pecan, even though the cashew is waiting. Like, we were waiting to send out orders because we literally wouldn't have cashew on the shelf.
Right.
So simplifying that, so we would, and then towards the end was fantastic. Like we would have 2 days of baking pecan and then 2 days of walnut or what have you. So just simplifying for the team and
Yeah.
having less chaos for the team. There was a lot of things that we had a system, like the big post-it notes. So we had that on the wall, and we would make it into 4 blocks because
Yeah.
again we only baked Monday through Thursday, and so we would plan at least 1 week, if not 2, if not 3 weeks ahead, right? So you could look up on the wall, so they wouldn't have to come after me like when they're prepping for the next day. I'm like, oh, Hope, what are
Yep.
we baking tomorrow? Like it's
Yep.
on the wall, everyone can see it. And we baked in barrels, so it was literally like a tumbler of granola.
Mm.
And we would do, at the beginning, it was maybe 6 barrels a day. Towards the end, it was 17, 18, 19
Wow.
barrels a day. But it was all planned out. It was out of my head and on the wall. And a
Love
lot of
that.
times it would
Yeah.
change and they would like yell at me. They're like, Hope, you're scribbling off and changing it on us. I think that's it. Like simplifying, getting organized, communicating with the team, and really like kind of getting out of the way. And
Yeah.
if anything, like I sometimes I did get in the way because I was the one making the change or like not being organized enough or what have you. And once we did get on the planogram with Whole Foods, that changed that routine. So like when we had a because our distributor was Rainforest, right? So we went with
Okay.
Rainforest for Whole Foods. And when a Rainforest order came in, again, like some weeks, literally 100% of what we baked went into case boxes for Whole Foods
Yeah.
and went on a pallet to go out the door. So that had to change, really trying to get ahead
Mhm.
and have that back stock and not create so much urgency and rush and stress.
Yeah.
Like I was all about, we used to laugh and we're like, we're not making medical devices, right? Like we are making granola. It shouldn't be stressful. It shouldn't be
Yeah.
stressful for the team. And so that would be my advice. Like do the best you can for your team to get it organized and simplify. Do not make
Yeah.
5 flavors a day, right? Make one
Yeah.
flavor a day.
Well, what's really interesting about the to me is when you were making that transition from doing,
Right.
multiple flavors in a day to one, you noted that like, oh, we might be out of the cashew
Right.
and and
Right.
now we're not scheduled to make cashew for a couple of days.
Right.
I know that people, because I've worked with them, would said, well, I can't do one flavor a day
Right.
because I need to ship this cashew. How do you
Right.
how do you overcome, what would you say to that founder who's like, but I have a cashew order that needs to
Right.
be fulfilled?
And I felt that, right? Like we tried to ship those orders within 2 days. Like the people orders, I would try to ship people orders before even stores, right? Like the
Right.
people orders and that customer support was so important to me. But also like we had to do it. You just have to push through. And even if it's one bad week of things
Right.
being a little bit delayed, it was so worth it because once we got, and it was about 2 weeks because it took with 4 or with 5 flavors, like it took us a couple
Yeah.
of
One.
days,
Yeah.
but it was worth it. Definitely worth it. And then
Yeah.
once you have it, like once the system is in place, then it was fine. And we got to a stage probably where we, like cashew was the slowest seller. We maybe made the cashew like once every 2 weeks. So
Right.
we would have, great weeks would be like 2 days of pistachio and then 2 days of pecan or 3 days of pecan. Pecan was the best seller, right?
Right.
And that for all your operations just makes life so much, especially when you're at that scale, right? Like
Yeah.
we were hand mixing the granola, hand patting the granola. We finally, towards the end, got a weigh fill machine. So we weren't hand bagging anymore, but
Yeah.
still like people were touching it at all phases, right? Like
Yeah.
it wasn't a assembly line.
Yeah.
So
Did
it
you,
just simplifies life.
yeah, were you careful about how much you kept in finished goods inventory? Like in either direction, like
Um,
not too low or not too much, or what was your like kind of attention level to that?
as I said, we never really got, not never got ahead. We did, every now and then we would say, oh, we can be closed tomorrow because the shelves are full, right? So
Right.
um, we had pack and ship right beside where everyone was handbagging. And it was, the metal racks that you buy at Costco. And we
Mm-hmm.
used these long bread boxes that had the finished goods in there. Um, we were probably towards the end, we got to a point where we were a week ahead, right? So we
Okay.
had enough product that we were baking it and it would go out the next week, right? So we
Yeah.
were, 1 week at arrears. Um, so no, we never, we just produced every day and we looked up on
Yeah.
as I said, plan ahead, but and also planning for when the rainforest orders would come in, right? So we would start building those pallets. So we started with 2,500 square feet and then we got another space next door for all of the
Mm.
pallets. And
Okay.
then, so with the rainforest, we were probably shipping maybe 8 pallets at a time. And I
Okay.
think there were 60 cases on a pallet
That's
and
quite a bit.
12
Yeah.
bags in a case box. Um, so yeah, it
Yeah.
we definitely got into a routine, which was nice.
Yeah. And it seems like forecasting is part of this process. Okay, we're expecting,
Right,
rainforest to order X amount every so
right,
many weeks.
right,
Our online orders average this, and
right,
you have a sense of what you need, and maybe you make a little more than what you sense you're going to need,
right,
and you kind of do
right,
it there. I think even forecasting that I know can be difficult for people, but I think that's another area where like you might get it wrong. You'll get it wrong a couple of
right,
times and then you'll figure it out.
right,
You know what I mean? You'll get
right,
better because you don't
right,
want to be out of
right.
that
Yeah,
product. Yeah.
absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
that's super
And I think the
helpful.
transition, I remember when we first started working with Rainforest, and so with Whole Foods, you obviously have like the promo seasons. And I think
Mhm.
the first or second promo that we had to do, they bought an amazing or tried to order an amazing amount. And I was like, that is literally like a month's worth of production that you
Right.
want in a week or whatever it was. And so I said, I can't fill it. Like, there's zero way that I can fill this order.
Yeah.
And they were great. They were great about it. They scaled back the order. But yeah, getting used to that and knowing the frequency of ordering and what is expected to happen
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's super helpful. Thank you for kind of diving into operations and a little bit
No,
of
no
that
worries.
with us. I think that's, yeah, really helpful. So you turned 50 or you are 50
Yep.
at this point in time where you're starting to
Right.
think about maybe I want to do something else,
Right.
have
Right.
another career perhaps. What what is the process that you take for like exploring and trying to find a potential buyer for the business? How
Right.
does that work?
Okay. Yep. So I always say, and you might say it differently, but it takes longer than you think it's going to happen, that it's going to
Mm,
take, right? So um, our situation was a little bit unique since my husband is Australian
okay.
and my son was finishing middle school, I guess. And we're like, right, are we going to move to Australia? Are we going to
Oh.
stay here? And then it was like, are we going to sell the business or try to keep the business? So two decisions were going on at the same time. And I had turned 50, right? And so we're like, okay, what are we going to do? So we thought about it. We're like, okay, let's look at selling the business. We found a business broker I think they were in Richmond. I guess I talked to like two or three and then went with whoever I felt most comfortable with. And, however much the fees were or the cost or whatever. And then it's like really mentally, it's a big hurdle, right? So I said, yep, we're going to sell the business. And we started working on the packet. Like there's this packet of information that you have to fill out and get everything
Okay.
together. My number one tip when I talk to people about selling their business is get someone to do your books and get someone to do your taxes. And luckily I had that for a couple of years. So my financials were
Mhm.
clean. They were legit. My QuickBooks were up to date. Everything was good. And then I was like, and then I just put on the brakes and I'm like, what am I thinking? Like, this is my baby. And
Right.
how can I sell the business? And so the broker was great. He's like, yep, we'll just put it on hold. And so we were probably on hold for a couple of months, not even probably. And then one of the interested parties who had already looked at it, who had looked at the packet, said, well, we understand you want to be on hold, but we're going to make an offer anyway. So I said, okay, well, if you're going to make an offer, then we kind of need to be off hold for everyone to have an
Yeah.
offer. But yeah, I mean, it was probably, I don't know, was it a year maybe, the whole process from deciding until we accepted an offer.
Yeah.
I think so you talk about like letters of intent. So,
Mhm.
there's a packet that doesn't have our name on it, right? So it's like, there's this granola
Okay.
company for sale in Virginia. Here are some light details. Like that was maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 pager maybe.
Yeah.
And then if you were interested, you signed a non-disclosure agreement. And then you got the big packet, which had all
Mhm.
the information and all the financials. And then they sign a letter of intent, which I think we had like 7 or 8 letters of intent. And we had three, I think 3 good offers. We definitely had 2 good offers. It came down to 2.
Right.
One maybe not so good offer, maybe another offer that wasn't great or whatever. But at the end of the day, we had, 3 to choose from. For me, it was, as I said, the combination of maybe we were going to move, maybe we weren't. And definitely wanting, like my knees hurt, my shoulder hurt,
Mm.
like my arms hurt. I would say it's tough standing on concrete for
Yeah.
5 hours a day, right?
Yeah.
So I was ready to do something different. And I also read somewhere it said, like, sell your business because you want to do something else. Don't sell your business because you're sick of it and you don't want to
Mm.
do it anymore, because that's a
Yeah.
very different mindset. So my mindset was very positive. It was like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, like I can't wait to do X.
Yeah.
And it just helped.
Yeah. I think the name of the company that you sold to was Cherries and Berries LLC. And I went to their website
Right.
and I could see the Hudson Henry product that's available for
Right.
sale there, still under the brand. I could see that it's still being sold on Amazon and also
Right.
that the Hudson Henry website still exists. And so
Yeah.
I share those things because I think that there are some people who think if you're selling a business, you're sort of, it no longer exists for your
Right.
customers in the way that it did before, or you're selling it to someone else who's going to absorb it and sort of do something different with it. But you didn't sell to,
Right.
I don't think they're like a conglomerate. It's from what I could tell. They seem like a pretty
Right.
wholesome
Right.
business with a niche in like
Right.
nuts and fruit and things.
Right.
And it seems like they continue to serve your customers in a very similar
Right.
way to the way that you did. Did that
Right.
factor into your decision?
Absolutely. It made it so much easier, right?
Yeah.
Because they were perfect partners. They had a few businesses in the food space. They loved the product, very easy to work with, very easy transition. And again, like you do, like you think, oh my gosh, this is my baby. And like I've had this company and what's going to
Yeah.
happen to it. I didn't have to worry about that, right?
Yeah.
I still talk to them. Like we're still,
Wow.
we chat now and then or whatever. So that definitely helped. Yeah. Again, you do the business that you want and sell the business the way you want and that you can live with, I think.
Yeah.
I had there was another offer that, was probably very similar. Like, I don't think much would have changed.
Right.
So I didn't have to grapple with, I wasn't selling to Kellogg's or whatever, right? Like I
Right.
didn't have to grapple with
Yeah.
what's going to happen to the company and what's going to happen to the quality. Like they loved the product. They wanted to keep it the same.
Yeah.
I think they've introduced 2 new flavors, which is great. And I ran into someone the other day and she's like, I love your granola. I've been buying it for like 6 years. And I'm like, have you noticed? I was like, well, I sold the business like 2 years ago, whatever. Have you noticed a change? And she's like, no, like it's still the same. It's still great. So that's
amazing.
lovely. Like that's what you
Yeah.
want, right?
Yeah, totally. Oh, that's so awesome. And so
Yeah.
what did you decide to do once the business was sold? Did you take a little vacation, take a break, take a trip to Australia?
I did. I did.
Nice.
We didn't get to Australia. We wanted to go, and the boys. So we ended up not moving, of course. So we moved. We moved into Charlottesville.
Okay.
My boys go to a school here in Charlottesville, and my eldest was getting close to being able to drive. So I'm like, let's move into town, be closer to school. I took like 10 months off,
Nice.
and I started writing a book, which is still in process. And I think that's when we talked. Like I did a little
Yeah.
bit of coaching. I have a software idea that I've been working on in my
Exciting.
brain for ages. Uh, it's called, I don't know if you'll put it in notes or whatever, but it's called
Oh,
Camille.io is the website. And so that's still in process. So I worked on those things and then I took a job, which is the greatest job in the world, with this, as I said, the Small Business Development Center, which are most
yeah.
states around the US, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I got paid to do exactly what I was trying to do with coaching. Like I help food and beverage businesses. It's free advice to them. So I work with them. And then there's another nonprofit here in Charlottesville called Venture Central. And we also help entrepreneurs and entrepreneur support organizations. So it's perfect for me, right?
Yeah.
It's what I always loved to do. I used to have people come to me, and actually, our head baker is a woman that came to me for help with her toffee business. And so I helped her, and I was like, but by the way, like, do you want to come for me in the meantime and make granola with me? So yeah, I just love talking to entrepreneurs and helping other entrepreneurs with their journey because especially in the food and beverage space, there's so much to learn and there's so
Yep.
many rules and regulations and dealing with the stores and whatnot. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I do. And I love it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've got a really, as I said earlier, inspiring story. We love to have founders here on the show talking about how you built your business on your own terms. And you really are a wonderful example of doing that from start to finish. So I just wanted to thank you for joining me here today and sharing your story with us.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I love, I say that I'm a pretty open book. Like I think it's important to have these stories and just, I mean, you mentioned it earlier. So we got to probably like 1.25 million in annual
Hmm.
revenue. We were in probably, I don't know, like 400 stores. I like to say it is possible. It is hard. It's a lot of work. But I also think, I mean, a lot of people helped me along the way, like other food businesses in Charlottesville. And because I would say, like, what does a $500,000 business look like? Like, what
Right.
does it look like, and what are you doing? And for me, that was big because I couldn't see it, right? Like I couldn't see $1 million in my head, and like,
Yeah.
what does that look like? And so I love telling my story, because then I'm like, okay, well, that's, 12 part-time employees making 4 days a week, starting at 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever. That's
Yeah.
what it looks like, right? And
Yeah.
this is what you're doing during the day. Like, what are you doing to grow your business?
Yeah.
Like, you're pitching stores every day, or you're improving your Amazon listing or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad. And I think it's great. What we are hopefully doing for others is to help people on their journey, make it a little bit easier.
Yeah. And I think I will add to that is that what does $1 million business look like? It can be regional, right? It looks like a regional brand.
Right.
It looks like a brand that did work with distributors, but again, on your terms, without a lot of the negative parts and pieces that come along with
Zero.
typical distribution relationships. And so I
Right.
think, I've been saying lately, thinking big can look small.
Right.
And I fully believe that. And I think that your business would be considered a small business based on its, revenue, certainly, and its footprint, but it supported your family, right? And like it supported
Absolutely.
12 people
Right.
with part-time employment in a company with founders who cared for them and about them.
Right.
It sold through stores in your region, which then generated revenue for those stores and its employees. Like if you really sit and think about the ripple effect of you making granola and doing it in a sustainable way in terms of the finances, that's, I mean, I get chills thinking about the impact that, quote unquote, as you said earlier, just making granola can have on a community and a region. So, I mean,
And it's
nothing
a
better
good
than
goal to
that.
have, right? Like, you don't have to get to 5 million in revenue. I mean, it's great if that's what you want and that's what you want to go through, but
Yeah.
$1 million business and you're taking, 100,000 out or whatever a year, like if you're profitable, $1 million is plenty for most people, right? To sustain a family. And we were very, very employee friendly, very family focused. And, if you need to take a time off for your kid, like, absolutely. Like we were, and our employees would say the same thing. Like, it was a great place to work, right?
Yeah.
We had fun doing it and paid well and what have you. So yeah, it's a good goal to have.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you, Hope. I appreciate your time and I'm just so glad we got to do this.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
Looking for more content like this? Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll see weekly podcast episodes as well as other content related to the show. Just visit youtube.com/@thegoodfoodcfo.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.